Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back for this first space of the year 2026. First of all, I would like to, well, uh, wish you a happy new year. I hope it will be fruitful, happy, prosperous, and hopefully we will see the light at the end of the tunnel of the current SMO. To be honest, I do not think this is going to be over this year. But if the things that we are seeing currently on a operational level pan out, the often spoken about by Timor criminal political agency for Ukraine to keep going with this war will be mostly gone, which means that the defense of Zaporozhye will be a very problematic issue. Most of the Donbass will be lost, and multiple other forays will be had up north in Sumy, Kharkov Oblast, and most probably some foray, some attempts up to Chernigov just to throw a wrench as a good monkey that we hope monkey will be. Now, there was a hiatus when it came to spaces, also a kind of hiatus when it came to interventions. It's completely normal. As I said, I took some time off for my own persona, and I would like to apologize for that if you felt that I wasn't being present enough. As for the rest, we will just jump right to it, and we will start with three main points. The first of them is that somehow Pigers still continue to think that there is a solution to their manpower shortage, and this solution is naming a neo technocrat as Minister of Defense, not understanding that the problem with war is not only technological. You can enhance your firepower, you can enhance your capabilities by force multipliers. You just cannot, I repeat, you just cannot make them do the job of the required manpower that you have, unless your decision is purely political, with a large pregnancy on PR, and that would mean that instead of, let's say, being happy and whatnot with actually sustaining the defense of multiple points and multiple positions along the front line, you are just going to prefer and save some juicy PR spots, like we've seen with Kupiansk, where taking back part of the city was followed by at least 300 to 400 square kilometers lost by Ukrainians elsewhere, and with the huge happening in Stepnogorsk and the advance of the Russian forces uh, east of Stepnogorsk towards the rear of the Orikhiv defensive island over there. And then, most importantly, because that's funny, but the most important part is the advance of the Russians on the west of the defensive bulwark of Konstantinovka, trying to cut off the secondary way that keeps Konstantinovka alive through its west, coming from the small cluster of settlements down from Dushkovka and then east towards Konstantinovka. So in any case, the biggest problem that we're seeing on the Ukrainian side is that despite everything, despite the Starlink equipped drones to hit the Russian AD in Crimea mostly, or around the Black Sea, despite the attacks on oil tankers, and despite everything that can or cannot be used by the Russians to make a buck, the solutions to the Ukrainian military issues are not there. So in certain sense, the circle is round. The issues that the Russians had in 2022 are now fully on the Ukrainian side. That, uh, for instance, where the Russians were impotently targeting Ukrainian energy and power production and power distribution systems in 2022 as a quote-unquote counter-value strike to the losses that we're coping with, both in Kherson, beyond the Dnieper, and also in Kharkov Oblast, the Ukrainians were advancing. And these advances culminated with the November 2022 period where the Ukrainians recaptured with both sides over 17,000 square kilometers. 17,000. So the welcome back again, guys. We're having the usual bullshit with this hellhole of a site. And instead of trying to fix it, I simply restarted the space. I'm really sorry for the situation. But as I said, I wouldn't wish to work with this site to anyone else but my fiercest enemies. So yeah, there we go again. So basically, as I said, one of the biggest issues that we have with Ukraine in the year of the Lord 2026 is that they do not have a renewed strategy on how to make Russia pay more for its war based on their own costs. So as I said, what Ukrainians try to do to Russia blasts back to them on a very different point, because unlike the Russians, the Ukrainians do not have the means to start insuring ships themselves. When it comes to, for instance, the damages the Russians are inflicting upon Ukraine, these damages are still not permanent. They are extremely grave and extremely problematic, but it doesn't mean that Ukraine cannot repair them. It just takes more time, but also forces Ukrainians to do these repairs. Because, as I said, unlike the Russians, which for some oblasts has straight told to their inhabitants, guys, don't fucking bother just for the couple of weeks or months, get the fuck out to a neighboring region, which we can protect better and deserve better with energy supply. And then once we fix the situation in Oblast X, Y, or Z, you come back and it's fine. Ukraine just cannot do that. Why? Because its social services and its social expenditure is maxed to the fucking hilt, and their own revenues, as I said, just do not work. Then on top of it, their exports have suffered immensely. And now that Russia is also starting to hit those exports in different ways. So we've seen that they have started to hit sunflower oil, which would, in my opinion, cause a increase in the price of mayonnaise. By the way, Ukrainian mayonnaise is not bad at all. It's actually pretty good. And then you would have a lot of issues for the Ukrainian economy if they keep going through this path. We already knew this because the former defense minister of fucking Ukraine said it as much, that as a short-term flex-in strategy trying to hit Russia, for instance, on its shipping lanes, would work for as long as Russia has other issues, is being pressured otherwise. But if it's some kind of long-term strategy, this would cost us a lot more. Us, in this case, being the Ukrainians. And I agree. The problem with Ukraine, as I said, is that they are caught in their own zugzwang, in the sense that in order for them to have a meaningful impact in Russia, they are going to put the Russians to react at the same level, which shows the discrepancy that a lot of people were talking about, that how the fuck can you, after 4 years, start doing proper shit when it comes to power generation disruption, economy sinking, so on and so forth, but for the other 4 years, or the previous 3 years, let's say, you did shit. Well, you can explain that by a refinement of the means of delivery, of the means of attack, but also a change in heart, a different posture, the fact that attrition also works for both sides, instead of having a more robust air defense on the Ukrainian side, a more complete air defense on the Ukrainian side. Now you have mostly idiots with interceptor drones, which they say they produce up to 3 to 4 million units per year. However, each and every night you got shit that gets blasted in Ukraine. So you have to ask yourself, who the fuck do these people try to fool? And as I said, and this is going to be the second step, Ukrainians have not solved the Adin Narod situation, which is they lie way too much for their own good. The problem with that is that a lot of the useful idiots on their ranks believe those lies. And the fact that you're going to have this situation when you believe those lies comes with a huge price. The first price is that you bet on the wrong horse. So right now you have this discussion that somehow, for instance, UMPKs are being stopped. There is no sign of that. I'm going to have this talk yet and again and again. The problem with UMPKs is they are almost silent. The only way to actually start and detect them is to have a pinpoint defense, which means you're going to set up a radar detection mean, a passive detection mean in the area they think they're going to strike you. This is not going to work for trench positions. So the positions in the fucking wild are going to get bombed, that you like it or not, because you're not using a typical air defense system. What is being said about these means to intercept them is either a APKWS, so a modified fire and forget missile with a laser detector, yada yada yada. However, as I said, this means that the affected area is going to be extremely small, and given that most of the MPKs at the line or nearby the lock are covered by drones which are going to record the results of these strikes, you will also sooner or later notice the improvised air defense positions and, of course, going to visit them, be that by long-range drones, as we've seen Rubicon use the BM-35, aka Italmas, to hit radars and S-300 complexes, or simply by other UMPKs going for the position, because these air defenses are going to stay silent at some point, because yet once again they rely on men. Men need to sleep, men need to eat, men need to shit, and are not going to stay out for ages. So the whole principle of how the Ukrainians are trying to fight this war, which is reduce as much as possible the human footprint, is simply not conducive to them being able, as I said, to stop the Russians from advancing. Now, there have been some dissenting voices. I spoke already about one of them, and to me, based on the evidence that we have and the evidence that is ongoing this year, doesn't seem to stop or to change from last year. Losses in material, at least, are largely equal, which means that we are seeing the full transformation of the war from year zero or year one, call it as you wish, to a actual attrition battle, which means that both sides are grinding their assets to a similar fashion, disregarding the posture. Now, it's true that that's a bit of a misnomer, because most of the Ukrainian losses of heavy equipment are had when they tried to counterattack. So, in a certain sense, there is a change in posture. Of course, these counterattacks are not offensive in the operational vision. So when they counterattack, for instance, Kupiansk, this doesn't mean that they want to start countering and getting everything beyond Kupiansk. It's a firefighting technique. They are just quelling a fire there that can spread and become extremely more dangerous this is not some kind of preventative move either. They are not trying to liberate the whole land of Ascol. They simply do not have the men, and if they start committing them there, they would create other gaps elsewhere. That's why, in a certain sense, it's completely understandable that people like the new Ukrainian defense minister are trying to address the manpower situation ASAP. The problem with that, as I said, is not that much that the manpower situation is going to be solved. The problem I'm seeing is that the manpower situation, from what the Ukrainian defense minister is talking about, is to better allocate what they have. I do not see how they're going to make it to get more people in. And if we have to believe what is said, which is 2 million people are dodging the draft, I do not believe that. A lot of those are already either gone or simply are hiding behind a protected work position or any kind of situation when they are not being able to be found or to be called in. That means also they have fled. But generally speaking, if you are short of 2 million people, by essence, there is a huge problem that you're going to have long term. It is indeed a temporary loss, a large figure, and this large figure means that you are down to roughly uh, half of what you can possibly put up for mobilization when it comes to the age group that you're trying to get in, and when you're also trying to factor in all the needs of the military. So once you do that calculus and you start then thinning it out for a lot of things, so for instance, age that cannot participate, guys who cannot participate due to the legal system of mobilization, the guys with multiple kids, single income families, all that shit, you end up with probably somewhere between a potential 700,000 to 1 more million. And given the extreme rate of casualties, temporary, permanent, or well, killed, missing, or captured on Ukrainian side, this means that in order for them to sustain the current tempo of warfare, by this year already, those potential mobilizable troops in the group will be just exhausted with in mind the rotational principle, which means that, for instance, if you have, let's say, 700,000, 800,000 that could potentially mobilize, mobilizing them at once, for instance, would mean that, for them to train, you would take out somewhere between 15 and 30,000 people in order to, first of all, survey them, coerce them to stay to their barracks, because as we've heard by Kostenko, 80% of the guys who get the fuck out of Dodge, have the fuck out of Dodge on their mobilization settlements or barracks. So, as I said, in order to keep month in, month out, let's say 30,000 guys or 50,000 guys trained, you simply would have to have 15 to 30,000 guys to train them, survey them, to keep them on. The problem with, as I said, with the situation with Ukraine is that by doing so, you are going to take out a lot of firepower on active units. On top of it, because you want these people to be trained by guys who have actually been under fire, this would have to be done by rotated units, which would have anywhere between 3 months and a year of experience into the whole fighting shtick. Unfortunately, as I said, the Ukrainians are not going there. I cannot see how the Ukrainians are gonna suddenly let 5, 6 brigades off the leash just to start training at least 20 to 30,000 guys a month for a whole year, because those guys used for the training, they are not going to stay there either. They're going to have to be pulled back, sent to their units, and other guys are going to come from other units. So that kind of carousel between fighting units and training units would further weaken some of the currently firefighting units that are being used by Ukraine. In other words, the problem is that instead of having a centralized system of training people to the best of their abilities for the basic tasks, I see that more and more are being trained in-house by specific units that these guys want to join. This, of course, is not optimized. It's not something good. That kind of training has to be happening once you are actually given to the unit you want to be in. But the basics should be the same for everyone. Weapon handling, combat medicine, movement, orientation, the basic on how to survive whatever bullshit you need to survive on the battlefield. All that stuff is supposed to be the same for everyone. Now, of course, this is lunacy because doesn't happen even in more established military commands. You will always have bad training systems and better training systems. But in this case for Ukraine, it is very important that those basics are taught in a centralized fashion by a centralized unit command. You cannot just fucking start spending mobilize people left and right to postal child units because simply you will first of all overburden those units, except for of course those faggots at Madhyar. Those guys would be very nice not to overburden them unless it's by UMPKs. But in this sense, trying to have this whole rotational asset of training units and fighting units is going to be very complicated if the Russians really keep going with the pace of operation that we're seeing right now. Furthermore, the other situation I'm having is that there is talk about paper armies, Soviet system, and I'm like, this is nonsense. Everything that we're seeing on the Ukrainian side right now, despite what is being said, has nothing to do with Western technology. Western technology is is an enabler of the Ukrainian tactical and strategical choices. True, but I do not see Ukraine using air power the way America would do, or the way France would do, or even Germany would do. Ukraine, when it comes to the air power, for instance, is in purely defensive mode and purely exploitational mode. So they're going to pop up, drop some guided bombs in order to hit Russian consolidated points, or they're going to use the F-16s as a mobile air defense. But this is not how the Americans are going to fight the war, or NATO in general. So I keep saying the problem with Ukraine, talking about things that, in my opinion, they do not understand, is that what needs to be changed is that, and I think it's going to be impossible, that they need to let go of this mental handicap that they are fighting the Soviet Union within them. They're not. What they're fighting within them is the fact that they are fighting their own image in the mirror, a better version, a bigger version than them, and that's it. It's the same thing that needs to be applied for the Russians themselves. I'm going to repeat, the Adinarod situation is applicable in full in the year 25-26. And you can see it in how both sides managed to see the strengths and weaknesses of both sides within both the battlefield and out of it. We are, on certain points, reaching the level of shadow boxing, and therefore the losses or the victories that are going to be had are not going to happen because one of the other is going to outsmart the opponent. Because it's very simple. Go in front of a mirror, start shadow boxing. You will not evade your opponent because it's a mirror of your movement. But because this shadow boxing actually is not, but it's coup par coup, so basically tit for tat, the losses and the victories are going to be determined by the attritional advantage that the one side has over the other. And it's there where the Ukrainians are losing, are having these losses, are losing. It has nothing to do with how smart or how stupid they are. The equivalence of forces that was spoken about for so long in 2022 and 2023 actually is happening in 2025 and will continue in 2026. So the Ukrainian strikes are going to be followed by Russian strikes. But on the battlefield, as I said, the whole logic of withdrawing the same amount from both sides over time will deplete the side who has less faster. And then comes Sirski with some bullshit about the losses of the Ukrainian army in 2025, 30% less. I'm like, given the visible losses of the Ukrainian army, material ones at least, in 2025, there is no fucking way in hell that the Ukrainian army is losing 30% less personnel in 2025 compared as to 2024 or 23 or 22. There is no way in hell for one simple reason. The equipment that is being destroyed is manned. Those guys were killed inside, outside, doesn't fucking matter. But the more equipment you're going to destroy on the open and be able to prove it, the more people are going to be able to kill, maim, wound, or whatever. It's just a statistical situation in the sense that the more targets you're going to hit, the more probable it will be to hit its occupants. And I'm going to tell you, if in year one you hit 1,000 targets with the potential of killing 4,000 or 5,000 occupants of 5 per target, but in year two you hit 3,000 targets with the potential kill ratio of 12 to 15,000. That's as simple as that. Even if I'm not able to kill all of the occupants, the potential loss is way bigger. So it would be an extremely bad luck for the Russians to not be able to kill at least as much as in 2024 by 2025, despite having hit more equipment, more assets. So it's as simple as this. You don't need to bother more with what Sirski is going to say, what pro-Ukrainians are going to try and peddle. Same things for the Russians. They've reduced some targeting, but they have other issues. So for instance, they are more and more going through with lighter means, but Ukraine has been going with lighter means for ages. And as I said, we can see the results. So the moment when you start understanding that we are going towards a proper attrition war now, and this is not going the way that people were saying about attrition. This is not World War One. That's the meaning. We are not gaining nothing or almost nothing for months and years, and then suddenly there is a collapse. What we're seeing is that there is a slow creeping, tantalizing creeping, but that regards very specific operational targets. The example, I think, Timor criminal, but a lot of other people. When we discussed 2022, back in 2022, the logic was advance upon Zapo, go over the Konka, start to establish southeast of Zapo, and then spread around that area, cut the bridges, isolate biggest part of Zapo, and then start to clean it up and take it over. This didn't happen for obvious reasons. The Russians were overstretched, not enough equipment, not enough manpower, very ambitious plan based on faulty intelligence, yada, 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 yada. Doesn't really fucking matter to repeat it. What happened, happened. 2025, 2026, however, the logic is completely contrary. Russians are going by a different set of rules. And this set of rules, I explained this before, I got banned, then I explained it again, I really got banned again. The Russians saw one big issue by 2023. When the counter happened, as I said, they saw that Ukrainians had a full ability to switch directions of their offensives because the road network had still a buffer area of over 30 kilometers when they could bypass and switch directions. And one of the keys of this switching situation was Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk Mirnograd was the area when they could stop, uh, stage, and then distribute forces along the southern axis, the eastern axis, and even reinforce the northern axis if it needed. I'm speaking about Donbass and Zaporozhye, not the Kharkov area and Kursk area. We're speaking really Donbass and Zaporozhye. So east and south in the bigger scheme of things, but within the Donbass situation, it regarded, so basically the Pokrovsk area going towards Konstantinovka and then going towards, back then, because it wasn't still taken, Ugledar. This was solved with Ugledar Wall. Ugledar Wall cut one of the lines beneath, advanced to Velika Novosilka, which was actually one of the most fundamental victories of the Russian military in 2024. A lot of people understood it right away. But unfortunately, the Ukrainians decided to go with a suicidal move, which was Kursk. Kursk, of course, would never pan out because I think, and everybody thinks, it was meant mostly for PR and mostly as a scare tactic. A bit what happened in Dobropila with the screen. But the Russians just didn't need to get scared the way the Ukrainians got scared in Dobropila and they got scared in Kupiansk. The only thing I had to do is switch some units and start a grinding match. I wasn't a believer of that approach. I told you, I thought that Ukrainians themselves, seeing that they had failed very early in the expansive phase. So basically, first 2 weeks was the most important part. They didn't get much more than about 800 square kilometers net, although they claimed 1,200, that's 500. Then everything started to crumble. So the problem on the Ukrainian side was actually pretty easy to understand. At no point the Ukrainians could benefit more from a transfer axis and a switchboard on the highways that they had in 2023 before they started the country. Russians saw this. They also knew that this, I think, from the get-go. It's simply at that point they just didn't have or didn't want to commit into attacking this axis or the switchboards. So they just let it happen because they were prepared to actually win off the Ukrainians during the counter on their defenses. This worked. The depth penetration was pretty shallow. It took also the Russians a bit of a time to resorb it post the failure of the counter. So from October, more or less, to October 2023 to August 2024, when the areas that were taken by, of course, Velika Novosilka, that were taken by the Ukrainians were neutralized or rendered inoffensive. For instance, the Russians were seen way past Robotino by summer 2024. And then by end of 2024, with the complete collapse of the Velika Novosilka axis, the conditions were fully ready for what happened in Uliapolye and what happened with the push towards the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So once you start analyzing this way and see where the Russians are going with this, then you understand. And I already posted a small thread. It's not even threads, really two tweets, about the fact that the Russians now understand what the problem is, and the problem is, in order for them to avoid a repeat of the counter, which is, I repeat, strategic option for Ukraine to quote unquote beat Russia, or at least force Russia to actually sit on the table and negotiate as 2 per 2 with them, would be to threaten directly the coastline, the Azov coastline, land bridge towards Crimea. And in order to stop that idea, as I said, There are two possibilities. One, bait the Ukrainians to actually commit into a stalling movement and block what's happening right now. What's happening right now, as I said, is a narrowing the operational space and the operational depth from one side, coming from Zaporozhye towards Orikhiv, and then coming from Uliapolye, aiming at Orikhiv as well, and establishing this 20-25 kilometer depth north of the current positions in Pologi, which means that the highway down the Azov coastline would be mostly free of Ukrainian strikes by HIMARS, which would be the most problematic to actually stop. The attacks by FP1, FP2 per se would still be problematic, but those would cost the Ukrainians a lot more to prepare, given that the flight time opens these assets to interception during the way. And in order for the Ukrainians to have any kind of impact, they were to start to individually target either echelons or trucks or any other effect that the Russians might use on the depth of 100 kilometers in order to keep supplying. On top of it, there is also the potential to force the Ukrainians then to start attacking shipping on the Azov lane. So overall, it would raise the cost and make the focus of the Ukrainian army go elsewhere than the rest of the front line. In a certain sense, it would just overpower the capacity of the Ukrainian army to start processing all the targeting and offensive or defensive planning. This is one of the things that Russians have understood. The thing to beat the Ukrainians right now is to force them to overplan, overthink, and overexecute. The more the Ukrainian army, the more the Ukrainian forces start to expand their targeting system, the less time, less capability they have to offer to their actual warfighting abilities. And as I said, given the very warlord-like system of the unmanned forces, Ukrainian unmanned forces that are doing something that's completely nonsensical, that are starting to attack platforms in the Caspian, repairs are within a week or so, and you're like, how does this help you losing two other cities in Donbass? And people are going to reply to you, oh, but that raised the cost for Russia. And I'm like, okay, but how does it save 1,000 guys that you're going to get back every month on trash bags? The problem of waging a war is not just bombing 1,000 kilometers away, although it would be extremely profitable if you manage to hit, for instance, Yelabuga or a gun manufacturing plant or whatever. But you do that once every fucking full moon. Meanwhile, the Russians, month in, month out, dish out 1,000 bodies that you haven't recovered, on top of what you recover, on top of what they kill behind the lines, and so forth and so on. So, once again, the problem with this war is that it's the silent killing doing the talking. It's the mechanical processing of troops on both sides. And on that, there's very little to say as a praise for the Ukraine's approach. It is what it is. I'm sorry to say it as it is. I know that a lot of people are not happy with that. Oh, look, they bombed this, they bombed that, they attacked this, attack that. Yeah, cool, great. You hit yet another ship on the Black Sea. Would you like 200 bodies with that, or how? How does it work? The problem for Ukraine, as it stands right now, is that its most important resource right now is not money, is able bodies. Because if we have to think about how Ukraine is seeing this, so they say they are getting these guys through 51 days of basic combat training, which is not enough, but that's something else. I mean, quote unquote, boot camp should be 12 weeks, but I understand that Ukrainians do not have 12 weeks. And for many things, these guys are not going to sustain even a week in combat same for the Russians, by the way, given the proliferation of drones, proxy assets to kill people, and so forth and so on. So the issue of body replacement, when you start losing them for good, and as I said, I'm going to tell you something that's extremely controversial, and I know that a lot of Ziggers are not going to like what I'm going to say. But let's say that you're going to kill about 10,000 Ziggers a month, but you lose 5,000 a month. I'm saying about killed, not missing, not bullshit, not just killed. You still are at the fucking immense deficit as Ukrainian military, because at the end you're still losing 60,000 guys killed, gone per year. We're not going to count the wounded. That's not important right now. The problem is the 60,000 that you're going to lose per year that will need a absolute replacement. $60,000 guys that would need a 51-day training. Just do the calculus, guys. We're not going to add the guys who flee, the 80%, blah, blah, blah. No, just those 60,000 guys. Yeah, it's actually what will be able to be dished out within the time frame of a year, given that you have more or less two months to train every batch. Every batch of mobilized will need 2 months to be trained. So in order to replace 5,000 a month, you need a batch of 10,000 in training as a minimum. That means that every month you need to mobilize 10,000 and train 10,000. Because your training is going to last 51 days, but let's say 2 months to be honest. As simple as that. And unfortunately for Ukraine, with a loss of 5,000 killed, I'm not talking about wounded, missing, amputees, all that shit. It means that in order for every batch to be mobilized and arrive to a point to replace the losses, simply the killed one, it means that every month you need to grab 10,000 guys on the fucking street, manage to hold them on, keep them training for those 2 months, and then release them in their fucking units. So you need to sustain a killed ratio at 5,000 per month. Now, let's say that you don't sustain that ratio, you don't keep it locked at 5,000. Instead, the recoverable losses hit 20,000 a month. That means that every month you need to mobilize 40,000 to put them in the batch and send them to training that 2 months after will be able to cover the losses of 2 months worth of recoverables. It's a simple working principle. Unless you start putting these guys into tranches, and then at that point, you do not have a continuous system, you're going to have bullshit that's happening right now in Ukraine when people see that some guys are shipped after a week, other guys stay for 6 months in training, and then people start getting the fuck out of the training grounds. So, in order for Ukraine to be able to sustain its losses and its replacement rates, given the rigidity of a military institution, they need to go way beyond what they're doing right now. So the solution for the manpower issue when it comes to Ukraine, as of now, is not the recruitment situation. It is trying to find within their own ranks right now enough people that are trained that can fight, pull them together and distribute to the units that need them. This is not going to happen for multiple issues. First of them is that it would need for local command grouping commands, corp commands, whatever the fuck you want, to relinquish their power to the overall commander, in this case, Sirski. And Sirski has already done this. Sirski is giving precedence to its poster child units, 425, 225, as of all these assholes. Sirski minions, and that's what we get. That's how Ukraine is in this shit. But once again, Sirski is doing what everybody would do. He is micromanaging because some things just don't happen the way he wants. On top of it, he has a very bold vision for the Ukrainian military as it stands. In his mind, I can understand this. Ukrainian military needs to weather whatever Russia is going to throw at them for 5 years. And then, with punctual counterattacks, when the Russians going to be completely exhausted in his mind, they're going to regain some points, at which point the Russians are going to sit with them to end the war in a less worse situation than they have right now. The problem of this is that people hate Sirski's guts. They hate his guts for the many failures he's had, but that weren't even his fault. Let's be honest. 2023, Zalupichka completely fucks up the content. He also fucks up Sirski in the ass in 2022 because he forces Sirski to go after the Russians way past Izium and Kupiansk. It is there where Sirski's forces get absolutely clubbed to fucking death, and then he's named to defend Bakhmut because he got stalled in Kharkov. And that's the beauty of it. And after that, Sirski appears that this yes meant for Zelensky, and maybe he is. I'm not going to judge him based on what people say about him. But once Zalupichka is in full command, full charge, he fails his fucking counter. Sirski is the one who makes the best movements towards Bakhmut. He fails, and it's completely normal because, as I said, for Ukraine, most important thing is not to attack in multiple directions, is to choose one, go on it, clear it out, and wait for the Russian response. It is tactically sound, strategically suicidal, but that's what a small Soviet army can do against a big Soviet army. That's it. There is nothing more to say there. And the complete fuck up in Kursk, the complete fuck up in Kupiansk, where people are still celebrating that they took half of the city back. But when you see what's going on the eastern bank of the Oskol, it's getting eaten out by the Russians. South of it, it's getting eaten out. The Russians are advancing towards Izium. It's far, yes. Pokrovsk was also far. Pokrovsk was also far. Ternovati was also far. That's the biggest problem that Ukrainians are not recognizing, and it's going to be the 5th year of this fucking war. The Ukrainians do not seem to be able to admit that they are up against someone that is bigger and better than them. This is Monty Python's sketch with the Black Knight. Just a flesh wound. Let's call it a draw. It's not a draw, bro. You are dying. You are losing. The only thing that's keeping you alive is that you are mindlessly accepting a complete exhaustion of your manpower in order to show up. And I'm going to repeat, this is burning the candle by both sides. And people will say, oh, the Russians can do it. It's not a problem. The Russians are going with their plan the way they want it. Since October 2023, the Russians have held this strategic initiative throughout, and it has been seen that they went from a specific level of losses and level of gaining ground to a acceleration, albeit small, of their gains throughout the two next years, 24, 25. Within the middle there, liberation of a temporarily occupied territory in the Russian Federation. And there it's true, we can take their words for it. Allegedly, is 1,200 kilometers shaved off as well. So that effort matters as well. It doesn't matter for Ukraine because they are with a minus 250 square kilometers in Sumy, but it matters for Russia, on top of the losses of both sides. So the problem with Ukraine is that the faith they are putting into a technocratic solution is like going to a McDonald's kitchen and trying by reshaping and reshuffling the organigram of the McDonald's franchise you just bought and hoping to put it on a Michelin guide. You can make your McDonald's franchise, your McDonald's outlet, more efficient into doing what they do, which is flip faster your burgers, flip faster your fries, serve them faster, have a better work environment, be more agreeable to the customer is going to come. But the customer is going to come to you. He's not going to be the same as the guy who's going to go to a Michelin guide restaurant, except in Vietnam. So you are still trying to sell two different worlds as possible to be coexisting together. I gave you another example of this. Ukrainians are trying to pimp up a Fiat 500 into an Abarth 695 and set it to race against a BMW M5. True, maybe it's going to corner a little bit better, it's going to be light and shit like that. But you still would need the raw horsepower and torque, and there the BMW is going to fucking scorch you anyway. So it's some kind of blind belief that they could do something that they know they cannot do. And at that point, you need to start sitting with Ukrainians and say, listen, guys, I understand what you're trying to do this. It's not going to work. And don't fucking fall for bullshit from Hollywood or from stuff that has rules, you know? Because it's one of those sport miracle dramas, all that bullshit. No, there are rules with some things. In sport, there are rules, so you can fiddle about gamemanship, all the shit, but there is a end of time, there is a scoring situation, whatever. Here, there are no rules. The other guy can blow a fucking MRBM up your ass with no payload, no war payload, and flatten your fucking shitty aircraft repair factory. There are no rules. He can go for a fucking terror bombing on some of your cities, and you can do shit. There are no rules. And despite that, the Russians are upholding certain rules, which is unfortunately insane for a lot of the guys following us. But that's what it is. The problem with Ukraine, once again, is that it still wants to control the narrative of this war. And that's a big, big no-no. If you want to actually win something like this, or at least push the Russians to go to places when they cannot sustain this, then you need to let go of the narrative. One of the things that we saw in 2022 that actually befell on the Russians was that Ukrainians, for a long while, did not distribute a lot of the kills until they were done. But you were feeling that why aren't the Russians advancing past Izium? Why is it so difficult for them to reach Barvinkovo? Barvinkovo is not that far. I mean, under the current circumstances, the Russians would reach Barvinkovo if it was 2022 within 3 weeks, and the Ukrainians could not resist and sustain the point of defense there. I mean, the Russians went with fucking mechanized assaults and failed to take Ugledar, and then with basic infiltrations and bombs straight up Ukraine's asses. They just got the place, and since then it's a roll. Slow, methodical, but it's a roll. And that's it. We are into another war. We are into a proper attrition war, where one side cannot hide behind, oh, we are killing 10,000 Russian tanks a month. No, bitch. You're basically losing the same thing, and that's the problem. That's something Teamwork Criminal has told you guys. When that time's gonna come, it will be time for Ukraine to call it quits. If they don't call it quits, what's gonna happen is what Monkey said. I would like to have Zapo. We're not gonna deal for the city. And when Zapo would be to the point when Pokrovsk was about a year ago, then you will hear something else. I want Dnipro. Then what? The problem with Ukraine right now is that their best chance to strike a deal, and I'm going to be stupid for saying this, was February 2025. After February 2000, after fucking March 2022. A lot of people say that Ukraine should have tried to cut the deal in November 2022, like Miller said, because they were on the roll, they were winning. That was nowhere possible, because in 2022, in November 2002, there were still enough problems for Ukraine. If they wanted to freeze the war where it was still problematic. But I agree, it was way better for them in November. It was just not possible for Russia to admit anything close to a peace deal. Now we are 3 years after, and Ukraine hasn't lost that much territory, to be honest. We're speaking about maybe 11,000 square kilometers, that they admit or not. But the problem is where they've lost it and how they lost it. Now Ukraine is losing probably as much territory as they could with the current manpower. But if the manpower shortage, as I said, as I made the calculus, keeps going the way it's going, then Ukraine is going to lose way more in 2026 unless something happens. And given the lack of happening, let's call it like this, on the European front. So the Russian money wasn't taken. The loan that's going to be given is going to be maximized for weapons and loan reimbursement to the previous loans that Ukraine has taken. We're going back to what I said. Ukraine has actually a year within the current expenditure plan, and if they keep going and poach manpower from the industries, from the economy, they're gonna still keep going down and down and down with their own revenues that will rely more and more and more on foreign hand-me-outs. And that would mean that the major economic engine of the Ukrainian state would be the military. Basically, what's being pushed towards Russia, that the Russian economy is just its military production, is going to be, in fact, what's keeping Ukraine's economy alive. And I know they're still exporting some steel, some flour, agricultural products, all that shit. No issue. I completely understand you guys. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that. My problem is elsewhere. My problem is, how the fuck is Ukraine going to survive 2026 with a massive 300 billion hryvnia deficit from get-go? So on month zero, they have somewhere between $8.3 billion of deficit by just starting the year. On a budget that is supposed to be between 90 billion to 117 billion. Like, you start with a 6-7% deficit right away for the max amount, of course. Ite missa est. There is nothing else to be said. The Ukrainian state needs the war to end as soon as possible, despite everything they're saying. This doesn't mean they want it to end as soon as possible, because there is nothing in the horizon for them in order to make it worthwhile. And that's the biggest problem we're having with Ukraine right now. They want to cut this loose because they want to survive the immediate post-war situation. But at the same time, cutting it loose now would force them to accept a lot of things that the Russians are trying to impose on them. For the Russians, there is also a time problem. The time problem is that the more the war goes on, the less Europe is inclined to talk to them and reestablish them as a supplier, as a trade partner, and so forth and so on. And it's true that we can say whatever we want. Europe is important to Russia. It's nearby, it's at the doorstep. So is China, although it's at the other doorstep, which is unfortunately where Russia had bet its farm on. So it's very simple. As we are seeing right now, the main issue for the Russians is not all the bullshit about ending the war because they're losing too many people. So, no, the main issue for the Russians is to be able to recover from the war on their own, quote unquote, as soon as possible. And in order to recover from the war, they need to reinstate themselves within the global economical system. And that means that keeping the Chinese as their preferred, in my opinion, economical actors, but also reintegrating within the European supply chains and reintegrating within the European trading system. Of course, this is going to be the most complicated thing, because Europe, being the perennial bad sore losers they are going to try and put this the same way they did to Ukraine. They're going to put this into this litmus test, when what they've lost on the battlefield, they will try to gain via the acceptance of Russia in their own trading system. And this will take time. And for the Russians, cutting this as much off would at least cut some of the sanctions off, because, of course, there's going to be sanction relief in any kind of negotiated end of this war. And therefore, the whole shtick of the European Union is going to weaken off. And for a lot of people in Europe, let's be honest, the moment Russia can be a frequentable supplier again, they're going to line up. Especially now that Trump's America is behaving the way he has always behaved. So both sides need the war to end for different purposes, but they also have a different timeline. For the Russians, I think the correct timeline would be at least 2 years. So if the Russians keep going for 2 years and inflict the damage I think they would inflict to the Ukrainians for 2 years, the war will not end with a negotiated peace. The war will probably end with a negotiated capitulation. If the war is cut closer and sooner, let's say within 6 months, then that would be a indication of how bad both sides are. If we see the progress on the ground, the way it's going, especially, as I said, Zaporozhye, Siversk, Konstantinovka, Russia can still go on and doesn't need to sit on the table to negotiate some of its positions, because it will eventually get to the point when no negotiation is going to be needed. And Monkey said it. The way the battlefield is going, we aren't too keen to start negotiating a Ukrainian withdrawal from the positions, because we're kicking them out as we speak. However, it also indicates that the Russians want this to end sooner because also their own situation at home is going to start to be itchy. For Ukraine, it's pretty simple. If the Ukrainians accept and go and sit and try to play hardball and most probably going to lose, then it seems that, as I said, their logistical situation on a warfighting standpoint is bad. There's not going to be any way for them to make it out of this alive without at least stopping this phase of the war first. And it's that scares me the most, is that on the Russian side, it doesn't seem there is any kind of attempt to slow Ukraine down by trying to negotiate with them in any kind of other way by saying like, bitch, you're going to sign this and you're going to take it, you're going to like it. That's scary to me. Because it means that the Russians are putting a maximal pressure up their asses. As simple as that. And it's there when the technocratic choice, at least sold as technocratic choice, starts becoming logical. Ukrainians want to prove that they can beat human waves, as they say, by technology. This, in my opinion, has never worked. Forget a little bit about all the Zulu wars, all that shit, all the Hernan Cortes, Moctezuma, all the nonsense. Human waves and technology require a level of disbalance between two adversaries that is simply not present in Ukraine. We are not talking America in Afghanistan 2001, 2002. I'm going to repeat it. Both sides at every single level can have access to the exact same things, except for, of course, nuclear forces and, of course, the own capacity of sensors and acquiring and kill chains. Ukraine shows refinement in the sense that they are using other people's assets, but they still go on a lengthy trial in order to actually execute that strike. Russians, pretty straightforward. Once they are fucking localized, anything, you put 1, 2, 3 Iskanders, couple of calibers, and then of course you get the Shahids. For Ukraine, once you start analyzing most of the strikes, you start looking at a very complex human network that is going to facilitate the strikes with a series of assets from the most treacherous ones, like Spiderweb or the bombing of the Kerch Bridge, to a more straightforward one when they can, so like the attacks on the airfields and all the other shit. The problem with Ukraine, as I said, is they have token access to everything except some of the most dangerous shit out there. While Russia has unbridled access to that. But most of the times it doesn't use it the same Ukraine seems wanting to be willing to use those assets. Of course, it has also to do with the fact that Ukraine has militarized civilian premises in order to shield them from Russian attacks. Therefore, Russia needs to go the extra mile to find them and bomb them. And of course, there will be casualties on the process. I'm going to repeat what I said. The problem with Ukraine right now is that it's a symbiosis between a regular warfare style and a crybaby style. They would like to fight this nonsensical war where they're the white knight and whatever they're going to try and do is perfectly fine. Whereas whenever they get kicked in the ass and the teeth is a war crime. And that's the biggest issue we're going to have right now. And it all right now hangs into the one single thread, which is foreign supplying, financing, and intelligence. If America at some point stops, or at least lowers that level of intelligence, and the funding stays the same, which is, as I said, only European Union starts giving money from its own coffers, then Ukraine has no way to win on paper. So, of course, they're going to start to have the more unhinged variants of their victory strategy. And yeah, we're going to go back to terrorism. And as for the rest, yeah. I mean, for the Russian side, it's going to be just a grinding, slow, and methodical march forward, which at the end of the day will land most of the territory that Russia seems to be willing to acquire, except beyond the Dnieper, into Russian control or Russian dispute. And therefore, as I said, the political agency for Ukraine to pretend they can still sustain the present Donbass and on the oblasts that the Russians have annexed would be ridiculous. On top of it, as I said, if the Russians keep pressing in Kharkov, then they also have a bargaining chip for territories they cannot access directly without losing a couple 100,000 people as casualties. I'm not saying killed, I'm saying as casualties. For instance, the advancement beyond the Dnieper, for instance, to grab the remaining of Zaporozhye Oblast and Kherson Oblast. And most probably advancement towards Kharkov and the push towards Dnipropetrovsk. At the end of the day, as I said, Russia cannot be satisfied with the end of the war within the 4 oblasts it controls right now. Neither can Ukraine. I've already made multiple spaces on this one. Tactically for Ukraine would be suicide. Strategically for Russia would be yet another lost opportunity after 2014-2015. And in a certain sense, it would be beneficial to the Russians because it would block half of the transit network for the Ukrainians, and that would render very complicated the defense of Kharkov if you have to stop on the 4 blasts, you lose everything, you exchange some territories and everything. You endanger Nikolaev, you endanger Krivorog, you endanger Dnipropetrovsk, you keep the danger well alive within Kharkov Oblast, despite the fact that the Russians are probably going to relinquish 1,500 to 2,000 square kilometers. You get back those 250 square kilometers up in Sumy, but clearly it shows that the Russians, if they want, they can come back at any time. And most importantly, I guess that the Russians would like Ukraine to start in earnest to reestablish and rebuild, because that would require manpower that Ukraine cannot spare for its military, which means that for Russia, a phase 3 operation in the midst of a reconstruction process on the Ukrainian side would be more and more probable, because it would mean that, for instance, a lot of shit you're going to start rebuilding, for instance, up north around Kharkov, you would put raw manpower on the line. Rebuilding Kharkov would require somewhere between 100 and 150,000 males. You need to add that to the 150,000 military personnel in the area. Means that suddenly you have 300,000 people that can become soldiers, and you can hit them while they are building, while they're in the open, and you can advance and force them to reestablish a complete different system from rebuilding to actually fighting a war. You can imagine the kind of effect that would have. A blitz attack on Kharkov, even if it's repelled initially, but it will force to reshuffle the whole system. And people are going to say, oh yeah, but what about the sanctions? Nobody gives a fuck. At this point, Russia has gone way beyond caring about that shit. So, in my opinion, there is also the flip side of this, which means that Russia could agree to a ease and allow the Ukrainians to actually start demobilizing, reaffecting part of the personnel, and then attack them when they are in the midst of this rebuilding process, and completely wreck the Ukrainian economical and defensive structure. So, yeah, guys, that was it for the start of the year. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.